so glad that all of you are here, and so we're going to get started. I know Pani is probably on his way, but we're going to start so we can, because we're so excited, and we want to welcome all of you to this very important meeting. So before we get started, I guess everybody know who I am. I'm Auntie Kella. I'm just a little peon on the LCA Community Association. And so since Pani is not here, we just thought maybe we better get started. So I'd like to recognize Jeff Horzat, who's the project manager of the Army Corps of Engineers. Good, nice to have you here. I have to apologize to you, Jeff, because usually we have a lay for our people that come and visit us here in LCA. I will make sure by the time the end of the meeting we'll have you a lay. And then also Dennis Toyama of the City of Department of Design and Construction. Dennis? So at this time, without any further ado, we're going to turn the time over to Jeff Herzog.
Aloha, good evening. Aloha. So, as I was so beautifully introduced, my name is Jeff Herzog, and I am the project manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Honolulu District on the Wailele Flood Risk Mitigation Feasibility Study. So that sounds like a long, complicated name, but the bottom line is that we are exploring the feasibility for economic and environmentally acceptable solutions to addressing the flooding issue coming from the Wailele watershed through the community of LCA, and as it exits out through the Foodland culvert that everybody's probably very well familiar with from 2008 and 2011, as you all have lived through this. I am the project manager. I am not the subject matter expert on everything. However, I did bring my subject matter experts with me this evening. Good evening, how are you? So over here, I do want to introduce my team very quickly. First of all, my boss, so if you have any complaints about me, feel free to contact him, Mr. Michael Wyatt. He is the Chief of Civil Works. I have my U.S. Army Headquarters policy expert with us on a 6-month detail, Mr. Jason Norris. I have my archaeological expert coordinator, Mr. Mike Desolitz. I have my NEPA coordinator, Mr. Danny Allen. And finally, the smartest man in the room as far as Corps folks go, my hydraulics and hydrology engineer. He's on loan to us right now from the Lakes and Rivers Division out of Huntington, West Virginia, Mr. Andrew Brainerd. So the Corps of Engineers has evolved over time, and we don't just operate within our own little bubble. All right, what we do is we tap into the expertise from across the nation, across the Corps of Engineers. And so that's why Danny is with us from Southwest Division out of Fort Worth, Texas, and Andrew is with us out of Huntington, West Virginia. It's an intentional move so that we can, as opposed to try and bring in everybody to Honolulu for everything, we can tap our expertise throughout what we call the enterprise, or the entire nation's Corps of Engineers. So if you get nothing else out of tonight, please, up here by Ms. Brittany Keys, who is the true brains behind our operation, there is my business card as well as a comment card. We're getting ready here very shortly, around the 21st of May, to release the draft feasibility report for public review, for agency review, as well as for a technical review, where we will bring experts from across the Corps to review our analysis to make sure that we're on the right track. And if you leave your name and your email address, I will make sure that we email you a copy or a link to the report. Also, if you're not so interested in getting a link to the report, we will put 2 copies in the local library here, as well as a copy will go to HRI and the Community Association so that you can check it out from there. And the intent is for you to provide your feedback on our analysis. We can do all the scientific analysis that we want, but if we don't communicate with you about the reality on the ground and get your input into this, then it's not a successful project moving forward for your community, for the economy, and for the infrastructure here in LCA. So please, if nothing else, get a copy of my business card and that comment card. There's also a handout front back to give you a quick snapshot. This presentation will be available electronically afterwards, so if you'd like a copy, again, just make a note on your card and we'll make sure you get a copy. Yes, ma'am.
By doing this work, will our flood insurance go down?
That's an excellent question, and we're going to address that here in a little bit. That's a very good question, and I'm sure you're not the only one in this room tonight who has that question. Her question was, by doing all of this work and by investing all of this money, is your flood insurance going to go down? Now, we will talk about that later on as we move through the process, about how it's incumbent upon whoever your sponsor is afterwards to coordinate with FEMA to start that process. So we're going to talk about that here very shortly. Thank you for asking. As we go through, my intent is to not take more than 30 minutes briefing you on 15 slides, because then after that, it's all about talking story and providing comments, questions, feedback, concerns. Okay? So please, if you don't feel comfortable verbalizing it, write it down on paper. We need your input so that we can move this forward. Now is the time to get your input to move it forward. Next slide, please.
Can you make it bigger? I can see it.
Unfortunately, we are a little bit hindered by our technology.
Can I get a copy of that electronically?
Absolutely. We'll provide everybody a copy electronically of the presentation. So the interesting thing about this project is that it falls under what we call a continuing authorities program. Congress says we will allocate so much funding to these programs for you to go through, do your due diligence, show that there's a federal interest, show that it's environmentally acceptable, and you don't have to come back to us. So that's where this project falls under that authority. Once we're done with the feasibility study and we're authorized to move forward for design and construction, we don't have to go back to Congress, all right, because they will fund it through the Corps of Engineers pot of money for this program limit. Okay, so that's what makes the Continuing Authorities Program such a great authority, especially for projects here in the Hawaiian Islands. The City and County of Honolulu signed the agreement back in 1999, and I understand that it's 20 years later, but the Corps of Engineers has gone through a revolutionary process, and really it kicked off in 2012 and moving forward, in which we look to actually complete studies and get work done. So I do understand that it seems like it's been a long time coming, and it's not only in your arena, it's across the entire enterprise of the Corps of Engineers. Significant changes occurred in 2014 through 2016. LCA Master Drainage Plan was accepted by the City and County of Honolulu Department of Parks and Permitting. Next slide. Now, this study area, what you see is the community of LCA here. But then what it really is it's this entire Wailele watershed that comes down from the mountains, down through, and it currently exits right here at the Muliwai, which is the natural estuary where the freshwater and the saltwater meet. And it's not the only stream that outlets down there. Koloa Stream, which is the much bigger stream, as you can tell as you're driving down Highway 83. You have the Wailele culvert, it's very small, that crosses over the stream, but then the Koloa is a nice wide open bridge that allows for the passage underneath, which is one of the things that we've addressed in this study. Next slide. So in a little bit easier to tell, here's the Wailele stream, and here's the Koloa stream, and then they both come out right here at the Muliwai, and then this actually serves as what we call a first flush basin or a sediment dropout area, so that as the water exits here and goes and then eventually out to the ocean, it has an opportunity to drop its sediments right here. But the problem is, next slide. The problem is you have 3,728 cubic feet per second passing through there at what you have probably heard in the past is called a 100-year event, or a 10-year event, or a 5-year event. And then you think to yourself, well, I've had 3 in the last 5 years. How are you going to explain to me that it's a 100-year event, right? That's the common understanding. And that is a falsehood on the part of us delivering the message to you. What the truth of the matter is that 1 in 100, or what we call a 1% annual chance of exceedance, is that every year there is a 1% chance that it's going to occur. Now, as impacts to the climate and changing climates and increased events and frequency of events, all that, yes, your 1% event will eventually either get less or get more. It's not a stringent baseline. So you have the 1% is 3,728 CFS. The maximum culvert capacity is somewhere between 700 and 900 cubic feet per second that passes under the Highway 83 right here. So what you get is an overflow. This is the Wailele stream, that beautiful little stream that goes underneath the culvert. This is what it looks like. And then what also happens is, because you have this backup here, then further up here, it jumps its bank. Many of you have experienced that, especially if you're back by the university, because what happens is it all comes down through here. And when it comes down through here, it results in this. This is from the 2008 flood. All right? And what I encourage you to do is afterwards, over here on this slide is right here on this wall. Many of you have lived through this and remember this vividly. All right? And we understand that, and that's what we're trying to act upon with this. Now, a secondary problem to that is the fact that Kamehameha Highway is raised. So because it's raised, as the water comes down here and it can't get under the culvert, where's it going to go? It's going to funnel down the highway, because the highway acts as though it is the kind of a lip to a bowl, if you would. So how do you address that? Next slide. You address that by attempting to reduce the risk of inundation throughout the community. All these colors right here that looks like an infrared scan, this is from a 2D model that Andrew put together for us. If you see blue, it's greater than 2 feet. If you see red, it's at 2 feet. Between yellow is 1 and 2 feet, and green is less than a foot. Ideally, you'd want as much green and yellow as you can. Green means it's probably just rainfall and you're in a low-lying area. All right, because what creates this flooding? Rain. We can all agree on that. And so based off of low-lying areas, you're going to have some collection of rain. So ultimately, you want as much green as you can. So how do you get that? Well, first you have to address the lack of capacity in the stream. But then you have to address the fact that when it jumps the bank, it has to go somewhere. So where's it going to go? It's going to pick up all of the pollutants and go through here, and it's going to pick up all the rubbish, and then it's going to finally exit up here at the current Foodland box culvert, which has it has that large box culvert down there, but its purpose is to be able to handle the drainage up here. It's not meant to have to handle all of this drainage back here, as well as it's tidally influenced. So you have a number of problems. And so, next slide. In order to address that, we looked at a number of potential solutions. Oh, I put this in here because we talked about that 1%. That 1% every year. More likely what you see more often every year is this, what we call a 10% event. So even at a 10% event, you see, especially down here at Townside, you have a bunch of red and even some blue through here, as well as you can see where it jumps the bank here and creates all that flood hazard through here. And that's side by side so that you can get a comparison how much worse it is with a 1% than a 10%. Next slide. So we looked at several different alternatives and what we call measures. By measures, I mean, what can we put either on the ground or a procedure in place to try and reduce that risk. We came up with full conveyance of water. In other words, get the water from the stream out to the Mullywai and out to the ocean where it belongs, so that it's not impacting the community. Will that increase the amount of water at the Mullywai? Absolutely. But, and even conversing with Department of Aquatic Resources and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the opportunity that the Mullywai provides for that first flush basin to get those initial pollutants out before it goes into the seawater is still a better alternative than it traveling through LCA, down the Highway 83, and finally making its way out to the Foodland Culvert when it's picked up all the rubbish and the pollutants and chemicals as it travels through town. So we have started coordination, and we're working on what we call a planning aid letter with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in which at this point in time they support this as being the recommended alternative moving forward. The other alternative that we looked at, well, what if we only convey some of the water through, but then we detain some of the other water? Initially, in the very early stages, we looked at just putting a massive dam in the uplands. But as I will tell you that although I'm not from the islands, as a homeowner here and as somebody who cherishes the environment and wants to engineer with nature where we can, and I have kids in the public school system, it's all about safety. So the amount of money, the amount of operations and maintenance, and the amount of real estate that would be necessary to conduct such a detention in the uplands is just not cost effective, nor would it be environmentally acceptable. So we didn't go with that one. But we looked at, well, what if we just put a few smaller detention basins along the stream and allow the water to gather there? But the fact is that would only serve the same purpose that the Mullywai is already going to serve. And then we looked at, well, wait a minute though, because if we let it all drop out in the Mullywai, well then the Mullywai is going to eventually blow out into the ocean, right? But the fact is the Koloa stream, which is right next to the Wailele stream, also empties into the Mullywai. So at the size of an event that allows for the Mullywai to get blown out straight to the ocean, the Koloa stream is already going to push that out. That's why we looked at using that Mullywai area as a first flush area. Of course, then there's always well, what if we don't do anything structurally? What if we don't want to disrupt necessarily Ahupua'a and allow it to manage itself? Well, if you're going to do that, then you still have to mitigate the risk somehow. So how are you going to do that? The most appropriate way would be to flood-proof your structures. Commercial structures would be responsible for doing some sort of wet flood-proofing, as well as your residential homes. You could potentially lift them above what we call a base floor elevation, get them above where the water inundates. But that doesn't do anything for your vehicles and your pedestrian traffic, and it still allows for all the rubbish and the pollutants to get carried through town and exit out through that Foodland Culvert. So that's why we couldn't get the cost-effective, environmentally acceptable benefits from flood-proofing or no action. So ultimately we fell on the full conveyance, alternative 2, next slide. And that is, what we're going to do is we're going to do some channel improvements right here. The intent is to put no concrete lined channels in this stream. What we will do is we will use armor stone. If you go down to Pounders right now and you look, or if you look up on the side of the mountain, you see this real natural limestone coral type rock, and there's a real opportunity up here to be able to engineer with nature using the appropriate size armor stones to protect that area. Where you would want your concrete is right down here. So you have your overflow channel, which is again armor stone, and it's an appropriately sized channel to make sure that you don't have scouring and erosion. And then you would put culverts down here, just like you have the current existing culvert. That's we have somewhere between 700 and 900 cubic feet per second. Well, in order to get the remaining cubic feet per second or the flow through, we would put new culverts here underneath the highway so that it comes through here and then goes out to the Mullywai right here. All right, and those new culverts, at the outflow, you would want to put just the minimum amount of concrete or armoring necessary so that as you have that immediate burst through and those high flows, that you're not creating any scouring or erosion. Scouring meaning that you're destroying the sides or the bottoms, because what happens there is then you start creating more of a problem. So it empties out in here, and again, it would naturally empty into the Muliwai, and at an event such as that 1% event, high consequence but very low probability, both of these would equal about 10,000 CFS, and it would blow out here. Now, there would have to be some safety precautions taken into consideration. Common sense will tell you that in the event that we're talking about here, you're not going to have people out there. But you would still want to put signage up, and you would still want to take the appropriate safety precautions for those people who don't heed or have common sense. All right, so that will be addressed later on, I promise. I can say that because I was probably one of those guys as a child who didn't have that common sense. Okay, so this is our recommended plan right here. So some channel improvements with an overflow channel and then exits out here. And what, next slide please. What this does is this allows us to not have to put any kind of detention basins here. I talked about that detention and combination. Well, I wanted to show you what would that look like. It would look like creating 25 acre feet of storage here. So if you go out here by McDonald's, between McDonald's and the Marriott, and on the other side of it, before you get to the residential area and the temple area, you see depressions in the ground, that grassy area. All right, picture that on a much larger scale, and that's what you would have right here. So we're not talking about putting huge cement skate parks or anything like that. It would still be natural grass with armoring along the sides. All right, but what it would do is it would pond water here before going out. The problem is you would have to acquire all of that land, and then it would impact the flowage, as well as it would have adverse impacts on the economics because of the amount of money that it costs to maintain such a feature like that. So that's why when we talk about economics, we talk about, next slide. We talk about how many structures are we protecting. Let me explain something, because this is another thing that perhaps we don't do a very good job of messaging. All right, the Corps of Engineers does not do any projects for future development. All right. No purpose of this study is for future development by anybody. What we're looking at is, what is the existing structures? Right now, we've counted in our structure inventory 505 residential structures, 98 commercial structures. What does that include? That includes 50 different businesses, the Polynesian Culture Center, BYUH, as well as this elementary school in and of itself has 20 different outbuildings that we're looking at. What are the values of those? And the total values of those is $866 million. That's a rough order of magnitude. That's what we're looking to protect when we talk about let's reduce the risk of inundation. Next slide. So what does all that mean? That means we take what is the value of protecting it and what is the annual cost. So we take the total project cost, and we did a rough order of magnitude, and we made a determination that it's somewhere around $12 million to fully construct this project. And then the over what we call a 50-year period of analysis. That is not the project lifetime, but that is the fact that we cannot look at economic growth and the diminishing returns for infinity. We have to pick a point. So the point on the wall that the Corps of Engineers has had us pick is 50 years by policy. So we look at the expected annual damages versus the expected annual benefits and the cost, and we come up with our net annual benefits. And again, because we're in the feasibility phase, we're encouraged to have a range of benefits. A range of benefits, you ask, what does that mean? That means for every federal dollar that we invest in a project, we need a return of investment of at least $1. That is not in cash return of investment, but in reducing benefits and protecting the infrastructure in the community. Here, for your project, we have a benefit to cost ratio of somewhere between $4 return of investment for every federal dollar and $7 return of investment for every federal dollar expended on this project. That is very robust. If you ask anybody on my team, they would be very happy to have a BCR range of anywhere between 4 and 7. And if you have any questions about specifics later on, Jason Norris, standing in the back, he is an economist and he's a policy expert, and he can talk much more intelligently than I can. But the other part we talked about at the beginning was the environmental acceptability. So as I said, we are in our initial stages of doing an environmental assessment and a FONSI, or finding of no significant impacts. All right, that will come out as a draft when my draft report comes out on May 21st, and that'll be available to you. It'll all be what we call integrated. So please take a look at that. But our initial analysis shows that ultimately, the best course of action is to do nothing, because then we're not having any new impacts. It's what do the new impacts look like? All right. Well, we already talked about that's not necessarily acceptable because it doesn't meet the study objectives of reducing the impacts of flooding, and it still allows for all that trash and rubbish to go through and finally get out through that foodland culvert. So we looked then at our structural, and if you look, we qualitatively ranked these, and that the full conveyance, using the Muliwai as a first flush, was the most environmentally acceptable. So that helped us to justify why we selected that alternative. Again, there will be a much more quantitative assessment done as we finish our coordination in this feasibility phase, as well as in our coordination with the agencies. Next slide. So we talked about our tentatively selected plan. And when you hear $12 million, that's a scary number. I understand, I agree. However, that's $12 million that's cost shared. The federal government will contribute 65% of the cost of the total project cost. The non-federal sponsor, which will be determined after we finish feasibility moving into design and construction, the non-federal sponsor will then contribute 35%. 5% by law has to be cash. And they also agree that they will maintain operations and maintenance into perpetuity. They will maintain that channel stream, that culvert, and the armoring up around the left bank. They will maintain that into perpetuity. What incentive do they have in order to maintain that, you ask? Well, annually, at least, the Corps of Engineers Honolulu District will send a team out to inspect it, and they will provide a report and say, this is what you need to do in order to maintain a minimally acceptable level. And as long as you do that, if there's an event and your storm and your flood control project is damaged, it is repaired at 100% federal cost. All right? There's 3 projects on the Big Island that are being repaired right now at 100% federal cost. They operated as and functioned as designed during Hurricane Lane. However, they received damage, so now they're being repaired at federal cost. Hahaioni over in the Hawaii Kai area, it received damage. It was maintained properly, and so now it's being repaired at a cost share because it wasn't originally a federal project. But your project would be a federal project, therefore it's a 100% federal cost if damaged. Next slide. So now let's get to her question earlier. Well, what is this going to do for our flood insurance maps? As we discussed, okay, this is not the end-all, be-all perfect solution. However, if we want to reduce, I'd like you to look at the difference, the amount of green and the amount of yellow versus the amount of blue that you saw earlier on. And I'd like you to notice that it's not coming from Wailele Stream. All right, this is because of the rainfall amounts at this level of an event, all right? Many of your homes, if it's in the green already, is probably already under that base floor elevation that you're currently in, all right? Andrew commented yesterday when we were talking about the project and we had looked at the firms, the flood insurance rate maps, that it's very surprising that this entire community is in that AE zone. You're all required to pay that flood insurance program. That's a hard pill to swallow. So I'm not promising you that you're going to fall outside of that 100-year, that 1% floodplain now. But what I am telling you is there is a very good opportunity for the vast majority of I see your hand on, the vast majority of you to see a reduction, if not a potential elimination of that need. And as a part of the sponsor's responsibilities when we move into design and construction, is they are obligated under that agreement to start that process, start that conversation with FEMA in order to start that process to have it reevaluated and do a flood insurance rate map study. Now, gentlemen, yes, sir, you had a question.
Yeah, what triggers FEMA to redo their map?
Yeah, and that's this study, moving into design and construction, will trigger the conversation to start with the non-federal sponsor. And then usually, if the sponsor is requesting it, FEMA will get it on their map, their line. But that would be a question for your city and county and or LCA Community Association.
But is there a natural trigger as to the completion of construction? Do they automatically do that, or is there some other trigger?
We can't tell FEMA to do it as part of our construction project, but the trigger should be that the coordination begins with the non-federal sponsor moving forward saying, hey, as part of this agreement, we're obligated to start coordinating with you for that.
I believe it's a city project. As the project's going on, we'll probably request FEMA that, there's some improvements here, and we would like to revise the map.
The city can do that, they can ask FEMA to do
The
it?
city has asked on other projects.
Okay.
Very good question, thank you. Yes, ma'am, did you have another question?
Yeah. The non-federal sponsor, that would be city and county hopefully?
Right, so that is still to be determined. It could be city and county, or it could be another eligible sponsor. And as we move this project forward, we'll sit down and we'll have that conversation.
Who's being a sponsor other than city and county?
So city and county, the state, a qualifying nonprofit organization.
Trump.
What's that?
Trump?
Trump? If,
Probably not.
well, I caveat that with, if Congress tells us to do it, we're going to do it. Other questions before we move on? Yes, ma'am, in the back. I actually have a microphone here. If I could get one of my folks to run this microphone back. I can't promise that it works, but it should.
My question is, if this is completed as it should be done, will that reduce our flood insurance rates?
The goal would be, it would provide the opportunity to reduce your flood insurance rates. Now, the fact of the matter is that's a conversation that's going to have to occur between the non-federal sponsor and FEMA. FEMA is the one who's going to make that determination through working with the state NFIP and FEMA. Now, let me explain this too, because this is what's going to happen is FEMA is going to redo your firms. And FEMA is going to tell city and county, but there does become a communication that needs to occur that I've observed talking to other people, in that city and county, state, LCA Community Association, whoever your sponsor is, needs to make sure that they're communicating with homeowners so that you can check with your insurance providers, so that your insurance providers actually give you the reduction that you're supposed to have because you're no longer in that. All right, so there's a communication process that has to occur, and I would encourage you that as you move forward with this project, to make sure you're having those conversations so that everybody's tracking the schedule and the timeline. Yes, ma'am.
Are you talking about actually starting the project in 2050?
Great question. On a future slide, I talk about my path forward, but 2050 is a long ways off, and that would not be my intent. My intent would be to complete feasibility in 2019. September 30th, 2019 is the deadline that we've given ourselves to take this project and provide it to my higher headquarters and say it's economically justified and environmentally acceptable. September 30th, 2019. Then it's going to go through the process, so in all likelihood, we will get authorization to move forward. And again, we don't have to go back to Congress, so we'll get authorization to move forward sometime, most likely, summer of 2020, in order to sign an agreement with a non-federal sponsor and begin design. The intent, because of the level of effort that Andrew has already put into this modeling, is the hydraulic side is pretty much accomplished. We would have to do some data gathering and some refinement and some geotechnical analysis and some topographic analysis in order to finalize our plans and specs, but we'd be talking probably around a 1-year design period from start to finish to get final plans and specs. So we would be talking about sometime around 2021, summertime, completing design and looking to award a construction contract. And then we'd be looking at anywhere between 1 and 2 years for construction. So a very optimistic schedule, but a realistic schedule right now would probably be construction complete around 2023. Not 2050. Yes, ma'am. Next slide. So, I talked to you earlier about trying to imagine the blue. This is what it looks like now at that low probability but high consequence event. And I want you to look at the higher than 2 feet through here and the higher than 2 feet through here and all this red. And I want you to look at over here. Now again, in this low-lying area, you still have some identified areas that's approximately 2 feet in depth.
And what area is that? Blue line?
Water Street, kind of in Water Street and a portion of East Street, right kind of behind the university. So right, it is kind of behind the shopping center area, where there are some low-lying areas of streets, if you will. There's still be some water.
And the reason that there's still water there is not necessarily from the stream or from the federal project. It's because it's low-lying area and that there's still some drainage issues that are not authorized under the congressional authority that we're working on this project. There's a couple of things that this project cannot do. And I will tell you right now that we did not address it. And that is, we did not address coastal storm damage or hurricanes coming this direction. We were not authorized under this authority to look at that. We were not authorized to look at interior drainage areas because we consider that a local responsibility, not a federal responsibility to investigate and or come up with a solution. However, because we've addressed this, it then provides the opportunity for the local community and the city and county to go through and address this. And I would encourage you to have that conversation with your local government and city and county for sure. But yes, this area here is still red and there's still a little bit of blue here and a little bit of blue up here. But again, that is not due to the Wailele Stream watershed or even the Koloa Gulch and the Wailele Gulch. And that is an interior drainage issue within the community of Laie. Next. So our path forward. Our path forward is 21 May. We'll make sure that 2 copies get to the library. 1 copy will get to the Laie Community Association. 1 copy will get to HRI, as well as anyone who fills out the comment card tonight will create a distribution list using a blind carbon copy so that you don't have to share your personal information. But we'll make sure that you get a copy of the link. When we release it for the draft report, we're also going to release it to all the federal and state agencies for review, as well as the city and county of Honolulu for review and comments. I encourage you, please, no comment is too small, and every comment that we receive, we will respond to, and we will put it in certified mail back to you, and it will get published in the report, in the final report. So your comments are very important to us, and we highly encourage you to participate in the process. We need your feedback. And we would request, in the top right corner, it has my contact information, it has my phone number, it also has a date, 21 June. All right, that gives you approximately 6 weeks to ask questions, make comments, as well as approximately 4 weeks once the report is released to make comments based off of what you see. All right. And if what your comment is, I don't understand this because it's written in legalese, make that comment and ask your question so that we can make sure that we address it properly. All right. What we don't want to happen is after this process is over, for you to feel like you just don't understand and weren't given the opportunity. So June to August, we will address all the comments, questions, and we'll continue to refine our data. August and September, we're going to amend and finalize our final report. And then we will submit the final document for approval. And once we have that final approval, there's going to be a period, it's going to seem like about 10 years, but it's probably going to more likely be about 9 months where you don't hear anything. All right, but what's going to happen is once we get the final document approved, we will then put that out via public record in the Hawaii State record and Federal Register, so that as well as it'll be on our public website, and as well as we will let HRI and LCA Community Association, City and County know that it's been finalized. All right, and then it's going to be quiet until we're told to move forward and sign an agreement to move into design and construction. It's not that it's waiting for congressional approval, it's that the Corps of Engineers is waiting for Congress to say, you have this much money for this particular program. Go forth and do great things. Next slide. Yes.
What happens if you don't get the money?
It's a great
How much
question.
money do you get, and how many other programs or places that you want?
That's a
Competition.
That's a great question. Competition is very real. Let me address this gentleman's question real quick, and then we're going to come back to that because that's going to be a good conversation.
Just as a general question, what is the attitude of the city and county to this project? As far as if you think about in the future having them as a non-federal sponsor, what is their attitude?
I'm going to turn it over to City and County for that.
Hi, I represent the Department of Design and Construction. We're the engineering team that we're sponsors on this project. Right now, actually, we're sponsors and we're partners with HRI as the local sponsor for this project. Right now, we're committed to this feasibility study, which I believe will be ending sometime in September or something. And because there's other entities involved, like HRI, there may be LCA Association, possibly the state, we will need some further discussions before there's a commitment.
So if
Thank
y'all, oh, was there a follow-up?
No,
So let's talk about competition. She's very correct in that Congress only allocates so much money, and there's so many projects going on around the nation, not just Hawaii, but around the nation. So what makes this project, what makes me confident that this project will be able to move forward? There's two things. First of all, it has a benefit to cost ratio or a federal return of investment of somewhere between $4 and $7. All right, that the federal requirement is 1 to 1. $1 return of investment for every federal dollar. So from a competition standpoint, it's very high in that BCR. So they recognize that the amount of protection that we are providing definitely validates providing construction and design money for this project. The second piece of that is this is not a $20 million project. This is not a $15 million project. We are estimating this at being $12 million total project cost, give or take. Right now we have a contingency built into that. And am I telling you and am I asking you to quote me that the final price tag is going to be $12 million? No, please don't. But what I will tell you is that is cost shared at 65-35, which means right now the federal commitment on this is less than $10 million. So from a competition standpoint, those two key factors make this a very, and then we could always throw in the fact that it's been going for 20 years and it hasn't been finished yet. All right, that's kind of the cherry on top of the sundae. But the truth is with the strength in the BCR and the cost of the project, it makes it very strong for competition that it will get the funding and authorization to move forward. Other questions?
what affects Corps of Engineer and the southwest wall?
Okay, so the question was, what is the impacts of the Corps of Engineers, or what does the Corps of Engineers have to do with the border wall?
Yeah.
And what I will do is if you write your name and your contact information down, I'll provide it to my public affairs office,
Yeah.
because we have specific people who address that exact question. So make sure you give me your contact information, and I will be sure that you get contacted.
What we are afraid of, we might be high on priority, but President Trump has his own priority.
Yes. As it stands right now, civil works here in Hawaii has not been impacted by President Trump or the border wall initiative. All right. However, again, if you provide your information, I'll be happy, so that way we can make sure we address that with you. I had a question over here. Yes, ma'am.
She's good.
Oh, no more. Okay. Other comments, questions, concerns, gentlemen?
Thank you. On the north side of the Wailele Stream,
Can we go back a couple slides?
BYU and PCC area there, what could the berm, or maybe berm is not the correct term, what could the structure be along that side? Right now, the stream sits level with the road or just below the road elevation. And you said it would not be a concrete lined structure. So could it be a concrete side structure, or what are the options? What options could you kind of let me know what that looks like, might look like, or
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Andrew up here and kind of talk about what it looks like, because he's done all the hydraulic analysis. So he'll kind of be able to tell you what is the berm elevation going to look like, and then based off of a 2-to-1 slope, you know, what we would be going for as far as that. Yep, that's the green button.
So the location that you were referring to, is it in this location? Okay, so for the hydraulic analysis, I basically, what I did was I inserted berm elevations that provided an adequate level of freeboard protection for the capacity of the channel. So there are some high-lying areas that we can, you know, of course, not have fill material in order to get that freeboard elevation. But then, you know, during future design development, I think that we would take the final design into account in order to determine what the best materials to place, you know, for the berm elevations. But as of right now, for the cost and for the features that I've modeled, what I have done is inserted berm elevations on each side in order to simulate what the net damage reduction estimates are for the city, not necessarily determine what the properties of the actual features and the constructed, which will take place during the design phase. Sorry, does that answer your question?
I think he's asking about how do you protect against scour?
Okay, so one of the things that I worked really diligently with this hydraulic model is determine our uncertainty with respect to the velocities in the channel. So velocities in the channel specifically need to have adequate riparian protection, or, you know, bed shear stress simulated calculations in order to determine what that material's ability to not scour during the design phase. So what we would do is, after I've now simulated what our max velocities for the channel are, then we can then design the actual bed material or the scour protection in order to withstand those velocities that I've simulated in the model and estimated.
But what options would you consider for that? What types of things?
Armor stone, cement line. What is that? What you're? Yeah. So, in your opinion, based off of the velocities moving through here, would we have to default to a concrete line channel, or could we use armor stone and fill and some natural riparian grass and some vegetation in order to reduce and store?
Thank you, Jeff. Sorry for my ignorance there. That's what you're referring to. I didn't incorporate, or I didn't encounter any velocities that would need to go to the degree of energy dissipation or stilling basin design or baffle blocks. I think that for this particular channel, I think we'll be very okay with just using riparian protection or like stone protection for the actual channel lining itself.
Yes, sir.
Will dredging be required in the Mullywai area? And if so, who is responsible to do it?
So the intent right now is to allow the Mullywai to continue to do what it's currently doing, and that is serve as a natural. If you go out there today, in fact, we went out there before we came over here. All right. Currently, the Mullywai is somewhat full, and then it's actually drifted over closer to the mooring points over here. And whereas last time we came out here, we were able to walk that whole area. All right, but currently it's filled up. All right, and I'm sure over this last weekend, I live Mililani side and town side. We experienced heavy rains. I'm sure you guys had heavy rains over here, and probably most likely because of Kaloa Stream that has partially moved its way out and started settling, moving its way out. So the intent right now, would dredging be required? No, we would continue to allow the Mullywai to serve in its natural state, and that is during a very high flow storm event, it would naturally blow out as it does now with Kaloa Stream. It would just continue to do so. We would just be increasing the velocities by about 3,000 feet per second, cubic feet per second in the flows. The Mullywai can handle that current amount, and it would still serve its existing capacities. Yes, sir.
Does HRI own the land where the new culvert would be built, and if, or who does? And if after it's built, does the city then own it? Would it be deeded, that culvert deeded to the city, or would it remain in the present landowners?
Right. So that's a very good question, and let's not just limit it to HRI, because there may be some flowage easements or some riprap work or some protection work that needs to be done to other properties that HRA may not be the owner for. What we're not talking about is condemnation and the city and county purchasing all these lands. What we're talking about is land acquisition for the purpose of either construction easements, or what we're talking about is flowage easements, in which we would look at what is the probability that the water moving through there would impact that, and it would be accounted for that way. So if the city and county is the local sponsor, then yes, they would be responsible for that acquisition, and it could be done through numerous ways, and the federal government does not tell the city and county how to acquire that property. So it could be done through deed, it could be done through property adjustments, it could be done through acquisition at fair market value.
But whoever ends up with it is ultimately responsible for maintaining it.
Absolutely, yes.
So I presume that's the city, would be the preferred alternative.
I think that'll be up to some discussion, but it would be the local sponsor would be
Correct.
responsible to maintain.
Now, what I have seen done in across the Corps is while maybe the city and county is responsible for it, perhaps there's a service agreement with either an association or with HRI or with a property owner. In Mililani, we pay a certain amount of money to our Mililani Town Association, who then is required to maintain a certain amount of those flood control projects. Yes, sir.
All right, so help me understand this a little bit. Also, the size difference. Now, the existing Wailele stream culvert is about almost 700 CFS, and the new culvert would be about 5 times bigger, 3,500-ish, rounding numbers here. And the two stream outflows, on paper look the same size, but one has the outflow capacity, which is the culvert size that goes under the highway, 5 times more volume.
Right.
On the necessarily 5 times larger per se. But, so what does that look like in comparison to the existing culvert? Does it require, is there a bridge there? Or is there going to be a bridge?
There will be actually 3 box culverts there. So what I would encourage you to do is to go out and look at the existing Wailele stream. And you'll see that it's about 10 feet across, and then it exits out underneath that bridge, or what we call a box culvert. And then go 300 yards down and take a look at the Kaloa stream and see. And so what we're talking about is, instead of 1 single culvert going through, we're talking about 3 culverts going through, as well as a channel with what we call an invert, or the bottom would be probably 2 to 3 times wider in magnitude. I'm probably talking in the vicinity of 25 feet wide at the bottom, so that it would allow for that conveyance of all that extra to go through, if that answers your question.
Is there a bridge on top of that?
We don't call it a bridge, and that is a federal nuance. To you all, it will be a bridge. To us, it will be 3 box culverts.
So do these box culverts have a pedestrian trail on top of them? Or is it only traffic, highway traffic?
So that would be a great conversation for you to have with whoever the local sponsor is at the time. Can we build that into the project? Absolutely. What we're talking about at this point is not necessarily construction material. We're not necessarily talking about design considerations as far as pedestrian traffic or vehicle traffic. What we're talking about is it economically and environmentally acceptable. Once we move into that, we will have those conversations as to whether or not, how wide do we want it? Do we want a bike trail that goes across, or do we want it to be a single lane going across, a double lane, 4 lanes, 6 lanes? I've tried to make that crossing several times. I almost want to put a stopwalk or a crosswalk there.
But your 12 million is based on some of those parameters. I mean, you have to know if you're
Correct.
not technically a bridge, but whatever you call
Correct.
it. Plus
And so what we're talking about there is anything above and beyond the federal project. So a pedestrian crossing there would not be a corps of engineers, and I want to make that quite clear, would not be a corps of engineers federal participation ability.
But the road that's existing there
Is I believe, Department of Transportation and state owned. So if the state, or if the city and county, or if LCA Community Association says, I get it, but we want to make sure that we can put a bike trail or something. So we want it to be this much wider than what you would normally say it is. So we would say, okay, we understand that, and that's what we call a betterment. In other words, the federal participation is up to this amount. If you want to pay for the difference, which it is worth it, because then you don't have to take into consideration mobilization and demobilization, and you have your team already on site. So there's cost savings in doing that. But that would be at the local sponsor's responsibility for cost. Yes, ma'am.
So right now, with the new culvert, how will the width of the road at that point be affected for the box?
As far as we're concerned, the width of the road would be the width of the road as it is now. It would be returned, the contractor would return the road to existing conditions, unless, of course, there was a betterment requested by state DOT or by the local sponsor, in which case they would pay that difference between the betterment and the existing road.
And then as part of the project, is there going to be a road diversion for us to use to get, I mean, I'm sure there is, but.
During construction, that's an excellent question. During construction, all right, this is one of those unique instances where there's only one way in and out of town. And it's heavily populated through tourism. You have the Polynesian Culture Center. All of this would certainly have to be taken into consideration. And there would have to be diversions and temporary access and temporary easements. I never say anything's impossible. However, it would be highly improbable that they could literally just cut off traffic, two-way traffic during that period. That would all have to be addressed, and that would be one of those innovations that we could get from experts in industry and or from across the nation. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
With the new culvert, how many of the current existing residences here in Moiwai
So at this point in time, there have been no properties identified for full acquisition and purchase and fee. At this point in time, we have selected, and HRI has initially given us the thumbs up that they are interested in allowing us to use this area for an overflow channel, for the exact reason that we don't want to disrupt residences to the extent possible. There may be a small area that's required for scour protection in which a small purchase needs to be made, but it's not a full property and fee. It would be just a sliver. I think what we're estimating now is about 25 to 50 linear feet of a yard in order to provide scour protection. And even in that instance, it would be for protection and not, they wouldn't be able to build there, but they'd be able to vegetate there and have it still as part of their yard. Yes, sir.
Which government body would manage the construction?
So the Corps of Engineers would manage the construction in partnership with whoever the local sponsor is. So we would be responsible for contract management. We would be responsible for quarterly providing cost updates and providing status updates throughout the design and construction.
Another question, during a storm event, this overflow channel has debris blockages of the culverts and what have you. Would local resources be able to access them, or would we be relying on the city about that?
So that's a great question, and what I want to do is I want to actually turn it over to the local community now. What do you do at this point as you're getting ready for a storm event with the culvert over at the Foodland exit? If somebody can, when you know of something coming in, are you currently dredging it? Are you currently taking precautionary measures, or is the city and county currently taking advantage of it?
We check in and maintain portions that we're responsible for. Currently on the Foodland Channel, right at the ocean side, it's really only the city and county of Honolulu in an emergency. So we call the city, and actually they've been very good at being able to come out and clean the sand away right at the ocean so they can discharge. So it's a little bit of a combined effort. We're checking on our side, and then we do call the city for the ocean outfall portion.
So as we move forward, we will develop what's called, well, first of all, it'll be part of your hazard mitigation, your local planning for response and preparation and precautions. But we will also develop what's called an operations and maintenance rehabilitation replacement manual, and we'll turn that over. And that way, the local community as well as the city and county or the local sponsor would know what to be looking for as far as regular operations and maintenance. I'm going to let her ask her question, and then we'll get you in the back. You can go ahead back there. I've got a mic right here.
How did it come about that this project is taking place here in Laie?
So, as I said, I'm not from Laie, I'm not from Honolulu, and I was not here in 1999. I did get here in 2002, but I was not here in 1999. So, is there anybody here who is familiar with the original request? Jeff, thank you. I'll get you right here.
Back in 1999, or prior to that, HRI had discussions with the city and county of Honolulu and the Corps of Engineers. I think at the time it's just that we recognized that there was a flooding issue to the community from Wailele, and based upon that discussion, then we agreed with the Corps and the city and county to proceed with this project. Although it's taken some time, but we initially worked with the city and the Corps for this.
And then in 2008 and 2011, you all saw the reality as to why this project is needed. It's one of those, let's learn from our lessons and let's learn from history and let's use those to our advantage so that in the future we can mitigate against future risk. Yes, ma'am.
I may have missed this in the beginning, but this is the plan we're leaning towards. This tentatively is what the plan.
Correct. This is our recommendation to our higher ed course at this point, and it's been accepted by city and county and generally accepted by HRI. And we are here to present our data and our recommendations to you all. And hopefully at the end of the review period and as we move this project forward, it is the recommended alternative from you all. And I'd also like at this point, Danny, since you're standing so close to the microphone, can you kind of talk to everybody about the conversations you've had with the agencies as far as what is their thoughts on our recommended plan?
We've been in conversations with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state resources, natural resource agencies. And we've brought them out to the site. We've looked through the areas. Fish and Wildlife Service is still wanting to do just a couple of surveys just to validate information that they have from past surveys. But according to the resource agencies, they can't endorse a project, but they have raised no concerns and have actually kind of said that this is a pretty good solution to the problem, especially when it comes to the environmental impacts or lack of environmental impacts.
So, in answering that question, can you just go over again how Koloa Stream will be affected?
So Koloa Stream is outside of what we call our study area, or outside of our project area. So the only way Koloa Stream is impacted is that its outfall at the Muliwai now shares it with the full impacts of Wailele Stream, whereas before you would get between 700 and 1,000 CFS because you still have overflow from when it overtops the road. It's still making its way out there. So it would increase from approximately 7,000 cubic feet per second, or that flow where it currently goes out. It would increase to 10,000 cubic feet per second at the Muliwai, and it would then blow out to the ocean with that large of an event. So the way that Koloa Stream, and one of our very early on alternatives was to actually, what if we divert Wailele over to Koloa, because Koloa has the capacity down at the other end. And that was very quickly ruled out, and for one of the major factors of the Corps of Engineers and people have learned over time that you don't want to divert that much. If it wants to go towards the ocean, let it go towards the ocean. And so this provides us an opportunity without impacting a lot of residences, but at the same time providing a lot of environmental, economic, and residential benefits, getting it out through that new overflow channel into the Muliwai.
So right now it's outside the scope of the project, but it'll be affected just because of the natural flow of water after.
Correct. We have done some initial analysis, and we do not anticipate, what I think I hear you saying is what happens when it blows out this way, is it going to back up Koloa Stream and create anything back there. And our analysis right now is there's no adverse impacts on Koloa Stream with the new overflow channel from Wailele. Yes, ma'am. Do you have a question, Miss? Other questions? You get him, and then I'll get her. Okay, here you go.
So back in the 80s, the Army Corps of Engineers came and put in that flood control project across the Lake. And we thought that was going to solve the flood problem here in Lake, and it didn't. So I'm just wondering, do you know why, and the confidence level of this working?
Sure. So her question is the Corps of Engineers came in the 80s and put in a flood control project and it didn't solve the problem, so what makes us think this is? The Corps of Engineers does not have any federal projects in LCA or Wailele right now. All right, to my understanding is that is not a Corps of Engineers project that's over there at this point. I know we did a study, but
I think Janet's referring to the Kahavanui Flood Control Project, which was a core project. But the Kahavanui Flood Control Project was put in to address flooding that was occurring to the community from Kahavanui Stream. That was not all of the flood issue. So it did all it was supposed to do. It has stopped flooding from Kahavanui Stream into that side of the Laie community. This one, of course, is to stop the other end where we have Wailele overflowing coming through BYU into the community. So it did its job. We want to now, of course, have the Corps do the same thing at Wailele to now stop that side from coming into the community. Because really, our feeling is that everything that we've seen and they've analyzed is that 80% of our floodwaters is coming in from Wailele, and there is stuff that's going to fall in Laie, but we have a much better chance that we can cut out that 80% and send it to Pounders Beachside, and then what falls inside the community now can go out through the Fruitland outfall, which wasn't sized for Wailele overflowing into the community. So this is the best option now to have a flood control project on both sides.
Yeah. So I apologize for misunderstanding your question.
This doesn't fix it. If you looked at the map, this doesn't fix it, right? We're still going to be flooding in the village, but it's going to come from other sources.
It's fixed at Wailele.
Yeah.
And the Kahavanui did fix Kahavanui, so it was successful and very effective in everything that was done on the Kahavanui side.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So looking at the where or the why, where these two, where this would split and we'd have a new overflow channel, and noting that we're going to send about 5 times more down the overflow than is going to go out to Wailele. Like I mentioned before, they're both about, on the map, about the same size, but you've got to have a lot of extra capacity on that southern split. Is it going to be a lot deeper, a lot wider? Is it going to still have an access road? What's it going to look like in comparison to the existing other side of the line?
Correct. So on the 21st, what we're going to do is we're going to put out some design drawings as part of that report. And so I will tell you that, yes, it's wider, it's deeper, and the diversion weir that you're talking about is going to allow for this 700 CFS to continue as it does. But when it gets up to a point where it exceeds that, it's going to automatically be diverted into the other stream. So right there at that weir, you're going to have make sure that you're going to have some armoring to make sure that you don't have scouring and erosion, and then it's going to travel down that new channel. So on the 21st, on the map, it seems as though that it looks similar in size, but the reality of the situation is it's about 25 feet wide, and it's geometrically defined so that it's sloped and not a straight cutoff wall. And it can support the capacity necessary to go through. Yes, sir.
The extra volume coming through on the overflow channel when that happens, isn't going to restrict the existing one that's already there?
It's not that it's going to restrict, it's going to limit the flow that goes through the existing to its existing capacity, which we estimate somewhere right now between 700 and 900 cubic feet per second. So that will continue to flow it will always continue to flow as natural, and then as the water level rises, because you have increased capacity going down, it will be diverted over. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is the movie like going to be shorter too, where that new culvert's going to be built?
So are you talking about the canal that when it comes through the outflow and comes over? Yeah, so not the Muliwai itself will remain natural. However, the outflow from underneath the highway, that immediate area right there, will be shored up because you want it to be able to continue to make that turn as it currently does right now. Yes. Yes, sir.
So with the bend in the culvert is going to be designed to handle the 4.5 million or whatever it is. Yeah. When it exceeds that, so if you get to beyond capacity, where does the water spill out and do what it's going to do?
So you're talking. So what we're talking about is that 1%. You're talking about that greater than 1%.
If it becomes,
yes,
epical.
If you get that epic type event, In our draft report that comes out, and Andrew can answer this because he's seen the modeling, but we actually do model for what we call a 0.02, that 500-year event. So that's that epic event that you're talking about. So when the draft report comes out, I would encourage you to specifically look for that so that you can see what the inundation looks like at that level. That would be a very large event.
So right now, the end of the project is the end of the culvert.
No. The end of the project extends beyond and goes out to the Mullywai.
So there's several properties that are on the ocean side of Camp Highway, on the south side of the new culvert. How will those properties be affected?
Great question. He wants to know how would the questions on the Mackay side of the highway be impacted. So if you go over there and if you look at this point right now, those properties are higher than the bottom, all right? And so as it makes that turn, there may be, and for design analysis will make the determination whether or not we need to put some riprap there or put some armoring there to protect it from scouring and erosion. As well as there is a property where it's very low lying, and it's currently every time there's an event it floods, and it belongs to a gentleman, Dr.
Reed.
Yeah, so it belongs to a gentleman down there. So initially what our recommendation would probably be is to fill that in a little bit so that he can still use it, and it would be provided as a flowage easement. That way the water can continue to make the turn right there. All right, so there would be probably some work done to his specific property and what we would call part of the project or a flowage easement. And then currently it floods, and it would probably be better than its existing state. But as far as the rest of those properties there, if you go out to the Mullywai and look back, those are already pretty high up and elevated. Other questions? You guys have been great, I really do. And by the way, I do have somebody taking notes. So I'm not just taking all of this in and I'm going to flush it when I leave here. It's very important that we get your feedback and we address this stuff. Our intent, Mr. Norris back there is going to write this report. And he and I've known him for 25 years. We're both a product of the Alaska Public Education System. So there's a very good possibility that this report will come out and it will be easy to read and understand. Now, when you get to Mr. Brainerd's H&H appendix, I don't understand it, and I have to ask him. So please, if you don't understand it, ask the question. Absolutely. Any other closing comments? I'm yours for another 38 minutes. Yes. Yes.
I just want to say thank you for your attention to our community.
Oh, thank you. Lai is beautiful. And I would just like to recognize my team one more time. Andrew got stuck last night in San Francisco. He arrived at 11 o'clock this morning and came straight here. So kudos to him, and I've encouraged him to get out and actually see the community because it is a beautiful community.
If you hear the questions, you can come up and ask some of the people here.
Please make sure to turn in your comment cards with at least your email address so I can contact you with a copy of the information. Yeah, you can turn it in.